Well, it looks like we've got a good number of people here now, so I think we'll get started. I want to make sure we can get through as much from Erin during the next hour as we can, and that we can hear as many of your questions as possible as well, because we usually get a lot of good questions at these sessions. Welcome, everybody. My name is Alice Lundell, and I am the Director of Communications for the Oregon Justice Resource Center. If you're not familiar with our organization, we are a nonprofit law firm that is serving clients around the state of Oregon. We're based in Portland, but we are serving people all over the state. We're working in the areas of criminal law, immigration law, and also civil rights law. We, in many cases, are representing people who are currently incarcerated in the state prison system, in the Department of Corrections. We're also helping people who have been harmed in various ways in encounters with law enforcement. And in general, we are promoting the civil rights of Oregonians and attempting to protect those rights through our work. In a moment, we'll be hearing from Erin McKee, who is one of our immigration attorneys, and she'll tell you more about the work that she does. But I do just want to mention a few ways to stay in touch with us. Erin, if you can move us on to the next slide. So we do have our social links there. We're active on social media, and we're trying to share a lot of good information, especially in these times that we're going through right now. We have a newsletter available as well, where we share a lot of updates. We're sharing resources. We're trying to be as helpful to people as we can with that, and you can sign up at our website. We also have a podcast. So this is something that we record kind of seasonally. We talk about what's happening inside the prison system in Oregon, which is something that no one else is really doing in a podcast, kind of regularly talking through what's happening in the system, what's affecting incarcerated people, and other civil rights issues we talk about as well. And I do want to just mention some of the Know Your Rights events we have coming up, because I know you might have friends, you might have co-workers who are interested in these, who couldn't make it today. We're trying to do as many of these events as we can. We have one coming up later this month, another one in November. These are both free events. Everyone is welcome to attend these. We're going to be putting this training onto YouTube, as I mentioned, so this will be available for people to watch. If you go to our website, ojrc.info/KYR, which stands for Know Your Rights, on there you're going to find a list of these events which are available to anybody. And you're also going to find some printable information. We've developed some basically letter paper sized signs that you can print out. You can put those up in your home. You can put those up in a workplace, just giving information. We have a version in English. We have a version in Spanish, and it has very kind of simple, straightforward information. What do you do in an encounter with law enforcement? What do you do in an encounter with ICE? And it's just really handy to have as a reminder there. So I'm going to turn it over to Erin now, and Erin will tell you a bit more about her work and will take us through the Know Your Rights information. But I will say that, we want to hear your questions. If you have questions, please do make use of the Q&A. When we get to the end of the presentation portion is when we're going to take all the questions at the end. I will say I want to be respectful of your time, so we will make sure we get through our presentation before 1. So if you have to hop off at 1, that's great. You will have heard the whole presentation. But if we do still have more questions coming through at that point, and people still want answers to things, we are happy to stay on past 1 and answer some more of those questions. So we will just do our best to get through everyone's questions in the time that we have. But now, Erin, take it away.
Thank you. So as Alice said, my name is Erin McKee. I am an immigration attorney and co-director of the Immigrant Rights Project here at OJRC. Our Immigrant Rights Project, our main priority is we advise criminal defense attorneys who have non-citizen clients of the immigration consequences of pleas and convictions. It's constitutionally required advice. Prior to this, for many years, I was in direct representation, representing refugees, asylees, and mostly low-income immigrants in removal proceedings and applying for a host of benefits. So I'm going to dive right in. I'm excited to see everyone, so much enthusiasm for these. We're going to do a little quick and dirty stage setting, some immigration basics, start look at what's happening in terms of ICE enforcement in Oregon right now, talk about what it means to be a sanctuary state, get to the Know Your Rights, which is the meat of the presentation, learn how to safely and effectively report ICE activity, and then share some practical resources with you. And I do just want to say up front that this can be some heavy information. We are in rather dark times, but I am continually inspired and heartened by how many community members and people are showing up for each other. And I think it is up to us as community to protect community by standing up for our rights. So some immigration basics. First of all, immigration is 100% federal civil law. There are due process protections, but they're a watered down version. They're not nearly as strong as they are in criminal proceedings. Also, immigration courts are not part of the judicial branch of government, which means they are not an independent judiciary. The immigration court system is housed within the Department of Justice, which is under the executive branch. ICE, CBP, or Customs and Border Protection, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. These are all part of the Department of Homeland Security, which are also part of the executive branch. So it's a very lopsided kind of justice system. What's happening on the ground in Oregon right now? You're probably aware that Trump has called up the National Guard from Oregon and California, then Texas, ostensibly to deal with war-ravaged Portland, untethered to facts on the ground, as the district court said. But as of today, there is a temporary restraining order prohibiting that deployment. Now, just this morning, the Ninth Circuit did hear arguments appealing that temporary restraining order. So this is definitely something that's in flux, and people should just know we're waiting for a response from the Ninth Circuit. Another change from former administrations is that there are no formal enforcement priorities. So prior administrations would prioritize or designate certain groups of people as priorities for removal. For example, people with serious criminal histories or terrorist ties. Trump has eliminated all those enforcement priorities, making it very difficult to predict who might actually be targeted for ICE enforcement and making things on the ground rather chaotic. I think that anecdotally, what we're seeing is ICE going after people who are easy to get or easy to find and deport quickly, including people who are going to their ICE check-ins or mandatory appointments. Trump has also expanded the use of expedited removal, which is a fast-track deportation without any process before a judge. Historically, this has been only applied to people apprehended within 100 miles of the border and within 2 weeks of entry. The Trump administration has indicated they want to enforce it to the full letter of the law, which includes anyone who cannot show to the satisfaction of an immigration officer that they've been physically present in the U.S. for at least 2 years. And ICE has interpreted that even more broadly to include people who were apprehended within the first 2 years of entry, even if they've been here for 5, 10, or 20 years. The very broad interpretation of the statute meant to deport as many people as possible as quickly as possible. The implementation of this expanded expedited removal is also currently enjoined, which means it is not happening right now. ICE is prohibited from doing this right now, but it's another strand of litigation that we're following closely and will update folks on. We've also have seen some ICE enforcement at the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Office, or USCIS. It's been several weeks since I've heard of this happening at the Portland USCIS office, but this is when people go in they're called in, right, for a mandatory interview, for example, a green card interview. And then we have heard of some people actually being detained by ICE at USCIS. Again, I have not heard of this happening recently in the last few weeks, so it seems to have slowed down or stopped entirely, at least at the Portland office. But Trump has indicated that they plan to hire armed agents or to arm existing officers in USCIS and give them enforcement powers so that it doesn't have to be ICE down there arresting people. USCIS officers in the future at some point will have the power to detain people directly. USCIS has always had the power to place someone into removal proceedings or refer them to removal proceedings, but they've never had direct enforcement authority to detain. We anticipate increased enforcement actions, both because there's ICE's budget with the big beautiful bill has ballooned from roughly $8 billion a year to $28 billion a year. Also because SCOTUS has recently issued an order finding that race and or ethnicity can be one factor in determining whether there's reasonable suspicion, authorizing law enforcement or ICE to stop someone, briefly detain them for further questioning. So this is quite troubling, and we do anticipate an increase in racial profiling. All right, sanctuary. Oregon is a so-called sanctuary state. What does that mean? Sanctuary is not a legal term of art, and sanctuary statutes and laws can vary greatly by jurisdiction. Generally, though, sanctuary laws limit information sharing or resource sharing between state and local jurisdictions with the federal government for the purpose of law enforcement. Oregon was the first state to pass a sanctuary law in 1987. It grew from the problem of racial profiling and passed with bipartisan support. The original sanctuary law prohibited law enforcement agencies from engaging in immigration enforcement or assisting in immigration enforcement. In 2021, the Oregon legislature passed the Sanctuary Promise Act, and this has greatly broadened the scope of protections under our sanctuary law. So now, not only are law enforcement agencies, sheriff's departments, police departments, etc., prohibited from sharing information or resources with ICE for the purpose of immigration enforcement, absent a judicial warrant. Now, all public bodies are prohibited from assisting ICE in those ways. And public bodies include public schools, parks and rec, public libraries, Oregon DMV, Oregon Department of Corrections. It's quite broad, and it's a quite strong protection. Oregon has one of, if not the strongest sanctuary law in the country. Cities, counties, and local jurisdictions might have their own sanctuary policies in Oregon. These are typically more symbolic and just affirming that they're an inclusive community and that they're going to follow the state sanctuary law, because it's hard to get much stronger than our current law. I think what's really important to remember is that ICE can still operate in any public space. So just because we're a sanctuary city or a sanctuary state does not mean that you are automatically safe from ICE enforcement. ICE can still do their job in any public space. They can still access any publicly available information, and they can use their own investigative resources to find and detain someone. So what if there's a violation? What if you think a local jail is colluding with ICE? Anyone can report a suspected violation of the Sanctuary Promise Act to the state hotline. When you report it, the state might investigate it further. The state can also help connect the victim and the victim's family to resources such as legal services. Anyone, and this is nice, anyone can file a civil lawsuit for injunctive or declaratory relief. So there are no money damages if you're the victim of a violation of the sanctuary law, but you can get a court to order the agency or public body to do or not do something. And you can also ask the court to more clearly define the obligations under the sanctuary law. And if you want more information on our sanctuary law, the Oregon Department of Justice website really has a robust webpage and links and resources on our sanctuary law. Okay, this is the part most of you are here for. That now that we've kind of set the stage, we can jump into knowing your rights. The basic know your rights rules are going to apply to non-citizens and allies alike, and they're going to apply with law enforcement and ICE. We'll talk about some caveats and some kind of differences in the context of immigration enforcement. And I also want to acknowledge upfront that ICE might violate your rights, right? No matter how eloquently and confidently you assert them, that is the reality on the ground that we are seeing here in Oregon and across the country. Still, it's critical to know and use your rights, because that can be key for legal counsel to later argue you were unlawfully detained and that you should be released. So sometimes I give this presentation with my colleague, Kenneth Krusher, who frequently gives Know Your Rights presentations, mostly in the context of criminal law enforcement. But again, a lot of it works for ICE enforcement as well. And Kenneth has three main rules, right? Don't trust, don't talk, don't consent. And I'm going to throw in an immigration bonus of don't sign, and we're going to go through each one of these. As a starting point, right, these rules apply when you are in an adversarial position with law enforcement. You think the cops or ICE are after you or your friend or family, and they're trying to get information about you or them. If you call the police because your car was stolen, you're not in an adversarial position with the cops, right? You're probably going to want to talk to them. So these rules apply when you're in that adversarial position, or you suspect you might be, right? And the first rule is really more of a mindset, and it's don't trust the police or ICE. You're in that adversarial position, you think they're after you, our friend or family. And the mindset is don't trust, as the asterisk says, not because they're bad people necessarily, but because they legally can and often do lie, right? Police and ICE are trained to lie in order to get the information or person that they're after. And whether it should be or not, this is entirely legal. Courts have said over and over again that this is legal and that they can do this. Typically, ICE might lie in order to get permission to enter your home or another private space, or to try to entice someone to leave a private space and enter a public space so that they can arrest that person. And this is because ICE cannot enter your home or any other private space without your consent or without someone's consent, or a judicial warrant. Now, there are some other exceptions to the warrant requirement that typically are not going to apply. We're not going to get into all of those. What you need to know is that ICE needs your consent or a warrant in order to enter your home or another private space. And yes, if they have a judicial warrant signed by a judge, then yes, law enforcement or ICE can enter a home or other private space. But I have never in my entire career heard of ICE having an actual judicial warrant signed by a judge in order to enter a private space to detain someone for immigration purposes or immigration enforcement. Sometimes the U.S. Marshals they would likely have a judicial warrant if they're going after someone for an immigration adjacent crime like illegal reentry, but that's criminal proceedings, and it's not, it's technically separate from immigration enforcement. And so what are some common lies, right? ICE might lie and say they're police and they're investigating a crime. They might have a picture of someone and be like, oh, or excuse me, ma'am, we're police, we're investigating a crime. Have you seen this person? You don't have to answer. If they're not easily identifiable as police, you can ask them what law enforcement agency they're with. If they don't tell you, they're probably ICE, right? So some of this kind of just depends on having your spidey sense attuned to when something fishy is up. But that is kind of a common lie that ICE might use to try to find someone. And again, these lies are perfectly legal so long as they're not coercive, that they're not threatening violence if you don't consent. The second rule is don't talk. Don't talk to police or ICE. You have the right to remain silent. So again, if you think that ICE or the police are targeting you or your people, and they start asking you questions you don't want to answer, you can just simply say, sorry, I can't talk right now, and then walk away or turn your body away. You don't need to be rude or dramatic about it. You can just say, sorry, I can't talk right now, and try to walk away. If you can't walk away, then physically turn your body away. And Kenneth always makes a point to emphasize this, that it's important to make a physical manifestation that you are not going to talk to that person. The old school advice used to be, you should ask, am I being detained? And if they say no, then you can walk away. But you don't even need to ask that. If you are, this should be off, sorry. If you think that they are after you, you don't want to talk to them, just say, sorry, I can't talk right now, and walk away. If you ask, am I being detained, or you engage in conversation in any way, they are just going to keep talking to you. They are just going to try to keep talking to you to get information from you. And Kenneth likens this to being hit on at the bar when you're not interested, right? You don't just say no, thank you, and then keep talking to the person. You say no, thank you, and you turn your body away. Now, don't talk is the default rule, but there may be exceptions in the immigration context. For example, if you're a US citizen and ICE is wrongly arresting you, that's a good time to get patriotic, right? And be loud about being a US citizen. I am a US citizen. You can't detain me. Even if the targeted individual isn't a US citizen, it might not be in that person's best interest to remain totally silent. There might be some information they would want to share. For example, if they have been granted lawful status by another immigration agency like USCIS, ICE might not know that. And you might want to show proof that, no, actually I have a green card or I have some other form of lawful status. If you have a prior removal order, and especially if you have a prior removal order and ICE indicates that they're going to deport you quickly, if you're afraid to return to your country of origin, that's a good time to say, I'm afraid I'll be harmed or tortured or killed if I'm returned, and I want to talk to an attorney. There are certain things that really people need to develop their own personalized know your rights plan and kind of prepare for what they might want to say in those cases. So again, there may be limited information that you choose to tell ICE. And then once you've told them that limited information, like, wait, I have a U visa, here's my proof, I am now going to invoke my right to remain silent and I want to talk to an attorney. You give the limited information and then you stay silent and ask to speak to an attorney. There are also some practical considerations, I think, especially when you're being detained by ICE and you could be, you're going to be in Tacoma or maybe some other detention center across the country very quickly. If you need daily medication, if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, you've got a baby in the house, you're the caregiver of young children or dependent folks, these are just practical considerations that you might want to tell ICE if they're detaining you. So again, while these are excellent ground rules for immigration, there's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all solution. And if people are concerned about being detained by ICE themselves, the gold standard is to get a consultation with an immigration attorney who can assess what your potential pathways to release might be, what might be the best plan for you if you're detained by ICE. If you're not able to get that consultation with an attorney, there are also some really great resources on the Oregon for All website. Oregon for All is a coalition of various immigrant rights organizations. And there are some good tools that you can kind of use as self-help tools to help you develop your own personalized Know Your Rights plan. I would also say that generally, if you do have lawful status, if you have a green card or a work permit, carry proof of lawful status with you. And we have some good resources on our OJRC website about what documents you might want to carry. I would at least say, carry proof of status and keep a copy somewhere else that people can access. If you have an application for an immigration benefit pending or you're in removal proceedings, then carry a copy of the receipt notice proving you have an application pending or a hearing notice showing that you are in removal proceedings right now. I don't typically recommend carrying proof on your phone or only on your phone and counting on that as what you're going to show to ICE. And this is because as a lawyer, I get very twitchy when people open their phones in front of law enforcement. I would not want that to be construed as consent to search the whole phone. So again, we have some other resources on our website about which documents you might want to carry or not. The third rule is don't consent to a search. Again, under the Fourth Amendment, law enforcement cannot search you without a warrant or your consent, again, subject to some exceptions that just aren't likely going to be in play in these situations. And this third rule, don't consent to a search, is pretty straightforward. There are no immigration caveats for this one, no exceptions. I can't think of a single reason why you would want to consent to a search by law enforcement. In my work, I read a lot of police reports, and people consent to searches all the time, even when it's clearly not in their best interest. I think people think they're, if they're helpful or cooperative, they want to appear that way, but I promise you that won't win you any points, right? Just say no to a search. ICE or police might say, well, we're just going to get a warrant anyway. We're going to get a warrant and search you anyway. Fine, go get a warrant. That is how the law is supposed to work. I will just briefly mention that one key difference in the immigration context is if the real police search you anyway in violation, there are stronger remedies for that in criminal proceedings than in immigration proceedings, but it's still worth, again, asserting your right that you do not consent to the search. Okay. Here is the immigration bonus. Again, there are not really exceptions to this. Don't sign anything that you don't understand. Really important to talk to a lawyer first. Again, ICE might lie to you. They might say, sign here and we'll let you out. Sign here and you can see your family again. Probably not. When you're signing there, you're probably signing away all your rights, your right to contest deportation or removal, your right to apply for relief from removal that you might be eligible for. So you just sign there, you're probably going to be on a plane pretty quickly. Again, you can plan ahead. If you don't want to fight your case, if you know that for you, your choice is if I'm detained by ICE, I do not want to be in detention. I don't want to go through that. That's a choice you can make for yourself, but it's important that you understand what you're signing away when you do sign documents like that with ICE. Okay, I briefly mentioned that the Sanctuary Promise Act prohibits the agencies from helping ICE in the absence of a judicial warrant, or if ICE or law enforcement has a judicial warrant, they actually can enter your home, etc., without permission. So the difference between a judicial and an administrative warrant, ICE will typically only have an administrative warrant to arrest someone. It is not signed by a judge. It's just created by ICE themselves. And it's more, a request, right? It's not, doesn't have any force of law really behind it, as opposed to a judicial warrant, which will have this court name on the top and be signed by an actual judge. If you work in an organization or business, especially, and you're concerned about law enforcement or ICE coming in and saying they have a warrant to search the place, then I recommend looking online. There are lots of great examples online comparing what a judicial warrant and an administrative warrant look like, so you can easily spot the differences. Again, I would look for the name of the court. For a judicial warrant, look for the name of the court on the top and look for a signature by the judge. If it's just an ICE warrant, it'll say ICE or Immigration and Nationality Act or Department of Homeland Security. But again, there are a lot of really good resources online that you can look at to see differences. Okay, ICE arrests. What are they like? What typically happens? So ICE will often dress in plain clothes or wear vests that say police. I think most of us have seen now that ICE is wearing face masks or face coverings. I mean, honestly, ICE used to not be that identifiable, but now if you see someone with the face mask and the covering and acting like they're law enforcement, you know, my money's on ICE, right? It actually does make them a little easier to identify them as ICE, even if it makes them harder to identify as individuals. Again, ICE will often have their own administrative warrant when they are targeting a specific person. But ICE can also arrest someone without a warrant in public if there's reason to believe the person is removable. I use the term removable. That's the legal term of art. You can think of it colloquially. We say deportable. For whatever reason, this person has violated the immigration laws in such a way that the government can place them into removal proceedings and charge them as deportable. So if ICE has reason to believe someone is removable and that the person's likely to escape before a warrant can be obtained, then yes, they can arrest someone without a warrant in public. Just want to note, like, different rules apply at the border, both in terms of arrests and searches. So your constitutional rights, your Fourth Amendment rights, and this goes for U.S. citizens and non-citizens alike, they're a little reduced at borders and ports of entry. Courts have found that, you know, the sovereign state has great interest in making sure that exits and entries are safe. So that's why TSA can search you when you go on a plane, things like that, or on the border. But if you are arrested by ICE or ICE indicates they're going to arrest you, firmly assert your rights. Again, ICE might violate your rights. We're seeing this, frankly, all over the place. But if you assert your rights, again, that can be critical for helping you get released later on. It's also important not to be confrontational, right? Don't obstruct. Do not physically obstruct an ICE officer, even if you believe they are acting unlawfully. This can come with pretty steep criminal penalties. Don't touch a federal officer. They don't like that. I've got one statute up here, which is pretty broad. There's a federal criminal harboring law prohibits concealing, harboring, or shielding an undocumented immigrant from authorities when done either with knowledge or even just reckless disregard of the immigrant's unlawful status. This is a pretty broad statute that historically has not been enforced very often or charged very often, but I do think there's a risk of this being charged in the future, and that people need to understand your own risk, right? You might decide that a certain risk is worth it to you, but every individual has their own risk factors. If your job depends on you not having a criminal record, if you have an open warrant or you're on probation, you know, maybe your risks are higher, right? So you'll need to think about what your reality is and what risks you're willing to take. This is a little kind of cheat sheet. I got this from a federal defender who, right, we're all trying to figure out how these various statutes might be applied to people, again, because historically they haven't been. And it includes not just that federal harboring statute that I just referenced, but other federal crimes, obstruction of justice, and things like that. And her tip was to ask yourself 2 questions. Is this a legally available option? Is it something that I can do under the law? And is there a non-immigration reason to do it? So some of you might have heard of the Wisconsin judge who there was a defendant in her courtroom, and ICE was outside of the courtroom, and it was shared and known that ICE was going to arrest that individual, the defendant. So the judge let the person out the back door of a private door of the courthouse. And she was then later charged with obstruction of justice. And the charge might stick, right? We're seeing what happens with that case. So if you apply these questions, was it a legally available option? Yeah, probably. Probably she had the power to let someone out the back door if her spouse was, joined her for lunch in her chambers and she wanted to let him out the back door, she could. But was there a non-immigration reason to do it? Maybe not in this case. That's a harder question to call. And these are also really important. These are questions that lawyers are asking themselves a lot too, criminal defense lawyers and immigration lawyers. So one example is defense attorney wants to waive an appearance, have someone not come to the courthouse because they fear ICE arrest. Is that a legal option? Sure, you can move to waive an appearance. Is there a non-immigration reason for doing it? I think that you can, but you need to think about it and know what it is beforehand. And I would say that individual, the defendant, still has a constitutional right to have their criminal charge heard in court. And so by waiving appearance and reducing the risk of ICE arrest, you're protecting those rights. That's just an example of kind of a thought process when determining when you might be crossing the line. Okay, so I know a lot of people on here, I'm assuming we have a mix of people who are both concerned with being targeted by ICE themselves and concerned about their neighbors or loved ones being targeted, and you want to be a good ally out in the community. One way you can do that is by reporting ICE activity. There are other mnemonics out there. This is the one that sticks best in my head, so this is the one I present on, but you can find other acronyms to help you. But this is SALUTE that I use. This is what you're looking for if you're going to report ICE activity. 5, how many officers and vehicles did you see? Activity, what were the agents doing? You need to be as specific as possible. Location, where was the activity happening? Uniform, what were the officers wearing? Look for logos, badges, etc. You might see a variety of logos and badges. There's ICE, there's CBP, there's HSI. It might be someone from another federal agency that's been called in to do ICE enforcement, like from the DEA or ATF. So look for those logos and badges. The time, what date and time did the event occur? And then the equipment, what equipment, weapons, tech, etc. Did the officers use? Once you have this information, or if you can call and report it contemporaneously, you can call the PERC hotline to report ICE activity. PERC is the Portland Immigrant Rights Coalition, but this is a statewide hotline that is connected to regional rapid response areas, and it's to start the rapid response when there is ICE activity. When you call the PERC hotline, what PERC does is their goal right now is to get someone there within 15 minutes to verify whether it is in fact ICE activity or not. If they verify that it is ICE activity, then that triggers calling in rapid response Attorneys, I think mostly are all from the Equity Corps of Oregon, or ECHO, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. And then attorneys can get to the scene as soon as possible to help advise the people detained of their rights and next steps, and connect them to longer term legal services if possible. Filming ICE. So this and the next couple of slides, I think I pulled all of this information very recently right from the Oregon for All website. And this is because you may have heard of the Oregon firefighter who was detained in Washington while on the job. And that firefighter asserted his rights. He was detained anyway. His attorneys were recently able to secure his release, and his lawyer said that the video evidence that the other firefighters had taken was critical evidence to get the secure release of their client. And so they kind of learned a lot about what type of video evidence can be used in court. And so that's what I'm going to kind of focus on now. I do think that especially when there's so much disinformation floating out there, having, and just distrust generally, having the receipts, having recording of what ICE is doing and if they're acting unlawfully is going to be critical for a lot of people. And it is a way where a community can step up. Again, only if you feel safe doing it. Assess your own risk. You have a First Amendment right to openly film law enforcement, including ICE, but they're probably not going to like it. So it is going to be a tense moment. If you think that you're safe enough and you want to do it, go for it. It can be very helpful, but you need to, measure your own risks first. If ICE tells you to stop filming them, you can state, I have a right to film this. If you're told to step back, film yourself moving back, keep filming the scene. This is something I'll, I think in the next slide as well, but it's important that it's continuous video with no gaps in time, no changes, that it's unaltered. Try to get good audio. If you can't narrate the facts, the same facts that you are looking for with that salute, right? Size, activity, location, uniform, time, and equipment. Never reveal your immigration status, unless you're a US citizen and you want to do that. And remember, anything in the video can be used in court. So again, step one, what to film, the salute. You just go through that. Badges, uniforms, all of the details. Again, clear audio of ICE if you're able to get it, what they're saying, what they're yelling. If you're not able to get that clear audio, then your contemporaneous narration, calm, objective narration of what is happening in the moment, and film continuously. Don't focus on the person arrested. This is going to be a very traumatic moment for the person arrested. You should be focusing on what the ICE officers are doing, because that will be the critical piece later when making legal arguments that they were acting unlawfully, that your client or your friend or family member was unlawfully detained. And then again, if you've taken the video, when it's over, or if you've got a buddy and one of you can be calling PERC while the other one is filming according to these guidelines, call PERC immediately to activate both that response, and then the operator will also explain where to send the video clip. Please do not share videos on social media. So, we don't want to violate the privacy rights of the individual person being detained. That's very traumatic again for them. But also so lawyers, advocates, and the family can decide when and if to release that video. And then I'm just going to end by pointing out some local resources, and then we can take some questions, and I can double check to make sure I hit everything I wanted to hit. Some local resources I've mentioned multiple times. Oregon for All, it's an immigrant rights coalition. It also includes organizations who work with or care deeply about immigrant and refugee communities. It is our statewide coalition, and you can find a lot of really good resources on their website. Equity Corps of Oregon, or ECHO, is our state universal representation program. These are state-funded attorneys and legal service providers who, if you're an Oregonian below 200% of the federal poverty guideline, then you may qualify for pro bono legal services through ECHO. They do, I think, typically prioritize people who are in removal proceedings, but they also represent an affirmative type applications or can provide at least some legal guidance with other immigration benefits. And so if you are looking for an attorney, you're low income, or your friend or family is low income and looking for an immigration attorney, ECHO is a good place to start. I would also recommend that even if you don't have like something you want to apply for right now, or you're not in immigration proceedings right now, but you're concerned that you might be detained by ICE and placed into removal proceedings, you can pre-enroll in ECHO services. So again, if you go to their website, or you contact one of the community navigators on their website and say that you want to pre-enroll in ECHO services, what happens is they can get some basic information about you, keep that on file, and then if you are detained by ICE, then and PERC is called and that rapid response is triggered, then those ECHO attorneys will already have some baseline information about you, which can be really helpful to help advocate for you in the moment, and maybe even try to prevent your transfer out of Oregon, Tacoma, or to wherever. So if you don't have an immigration attorney, you're concerned about getting detained by ICE, you can pre-enroll in ECHO services. The Oregon Law Center, OLC, and Latino Network have also created really great family preparedness packets, also accessible on the Oregon for All website. These are resources that people can use to help them prepare for some of the practical consequences of being detained by ICE. So outside of kind of the immigration law sphere, who's going to pick up my kids, what's going to happen with my children, what will happen with my property, what can you do now to prepare for those potential consequences. Emerge, the Interfaith Movement for Immigrant Rights and Justice, I think is what that stands for, but Emerge has an accompaniment program. They're getting quite a few requests right now, so I'm not sure what their capacity is right now, but they have, they can send a community member out with someone, typically to a removal, if they have an ICE check-in or another appointment with federal authorities or immigration authorities. That's a time when they might want someone to go with them, just to help them feel safe. And if they are detained, then that person can contact their family and attorney immediately. And I already mentioned that Oregon DOJ has a lot of great guidance on sanctuary on their website. So those are all great local resources to check out in Oregon. And I think I've left some time for questions if we've got them.
So Erin, we do have a ton of questions. I'm thinking it might be helpful if I try and sort of organize them a bit for you. Some of them are kind of related issues, so maybe I'll ask the questions to you and then you can answer them. One area where we have a ton of questions is around related to private versus public. So I'll just hit you with a few of those. One that I'm seeing here is a car a private space? Is your car a private space or is it a public space?
Your car, man, I actually made notes prepped in this question. Your car is a private space. There are some exceptions um, when it comes to automobiles, but yes, I mean, it's not a public space like that.
Okay. Another question that came in, somebody has seen that there was a person who was detained while they were in a food truck because the side door of the truck was open, and then that was considered to be a public space because it was open, even though it was their workspace. So looking for some clarification on how you think that would be possible. Does that seem like it should be a public space? Like, what does that mean exactly?
So I will say some of these private versus public space questions are out of my like immediate personal experience because they're typically more in the context of criminal defense and criminal law. Based on what I do know, I certainly think that is questionable that that's a private work area space, the fact that the door is open, but if it could be construed as consent, I think that that's potentially an open question. It's certainly not a question that I have a specific answer to. I apologize.
Okay. Um, so another question here, when we talk about ICE having to have a warrant to legally enter a private space, when you're talking about your home, that's pretty obvious. We understand that that is a completely private, closed off space. What about when we're more in somewhere like we're in a church, we're in a medical clinic, we're in a store where it is a private business or a private organization, maybe, but also it has a public aspect. People can come in there. It's generally open to people. Like, what is the legalities there around ICE and warrants, and can if you're in the business as the business owner or the business manager, can you be turning ICE away and say this is private, or is it considered public? Like, how do we understand the difference between that?
That's an excellent question. And because it's been asked frequently when I present with Kenneth, who's the criminal defense expert, what he has explained and makes sense, right, is something like a store is a public space in the sense that anyone can come into it, but it's also private property. And as the business owner, you have the right to ask anyone to leave that private property, right? I mean, if someone comes into your store and they are causing a racket and you don't want them in the store, you can ask them to leave. And if they don't leave, right, now they've trespassed, they've committed trespass. So you can ask them to leave, and I would also say, as an attorney, right, I'm always thinking of like the worst thing that can happen, right, in these situations, like to the person who's asking it. And are you going to be accused of like trying to harbor or shield or evade law enforcement? So I do think you should think about your particular situation and prepare for what your reasons might be for asking ICE to leave. So for example, we had done a presentation at a food bank, and they had a similar question, right? It's public, people can come in. We said you can ask them to leave. What was that obstruction? And the people at the food bank, replied that there are a lot of people who use their services who've had negative contact with law enforcement generally, and they get very scared when law enforcement's around. Okay, I'm trying to protect my clientele. That's a reason to ask you to leave. That's non-immigration, right? That you're not just trying to help someone evade ICE enforcement or advising them to violate the law, but you're trying to protect the safety of your space. And then the medical clinic, again, most medical clinics and healthcare facilities, and because I have presented to multiple healthcare facilities at this point, have kind of clear private spaces, right? Like your hospital room's a private space versus the lobby or a hallway. Also in a medical clinic setting, you've got HIPAA, which provides very strong privacy protection. No, Alice, did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that hopefully we'll get to that question. Some other questions around warrants here. So, for example, when we're talking about very sensitive spaces, like, for example, a domestic violence shelter, a place that provides services to people who've been victims of sexual assault, typically places that people want a high degree of privacy and protection.
Mm-hmm.
Can ICE go into those kinds of places? Are there any guidelines or any protections there? Or is it even in those kinds of places they can come in without a warrant potentially?
I mean, it depends on the specific place. So previously, prior administrations had memos designating certain areas as sensitive locations or or protected areas in which I should not be conducting enforcement activity, and things like churches, schools, protests, healthcare facilities, social service social service providers like a DV shelter specifically. Previously, ICE was prohibited from conducting enforcement actions in those places. Now there are no restrictions. There's kind of this loosey-goosey memo, like, ICE is supposed to use a healthy dose of discretion. So it's legally possible that ICE could try to detain someone in these previously protected areas. But again, it's only if it's a space that would be open to the public, and if it is a private space, which includes most businesses and like nonprofits and social service providers, you can ask someone to leave, right? You're making my clients uncomfortable. This is a safe space. I would like you to leave. So they don't leave, they've trespassed.
And another related question about asking ICE to leave. We have a couple around that. One person asked if someone is working in a cafe, mainly on their own, so they're not the owner of the business, they're not necessarily a manager or anything like that. Can you, even as a member of the staff there, can you ask ICE to leave? And also, can you refuse to serve ICE? If you're working in food service, you see somebody that you know or believe to be working for ICE, can you say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to serve you because they're ICE? Can you do that?
Again, if you could do it with just an obnoxious member of the public, that's kind of like the analogy I would use. Like, if you could do it with someone else for a different reason, then yes, you can do it to an ICE officer. And I guess that would be whatever your internal policy was. I mean, I spent many years in the service industry, and there was not always an owner or manager around. But if I needed to ask a drunk and obnoxious patron to leave, then I did so.
Okay. Okay, moving on to some other questions. Is a judicial warrant also needed for a search, right? If they want to search you, do they have to have a judicial warrant? Okay, that's easy. Does ICE wear body-worn cameras? Are they recording their interaction with you?
Not to my knowledge. Typically no. But I don't know what's happening all over the country. No.
Okay. Do you know of an app that someone could use that would automatically lock other people out of their phone and notify family that you've been contacted with law enforcement? Have you ever heard of an app like that would do
I
that?
haven't. It's a good idea. Yeah.
Maybe we can look into that. Someone has a question about doxing ICE agents. So there have been, maybe people have seen this on social media, calls to publish information about agents, right? If people are aware of the identity of people who are working with ICE, there's a lot of focus on them right now. What's going on there? Is that something you can do legally? Are people being charged for doing that? Like, what's the status of doing that?
So I know that in various jurisdictions, there have been like anti-doxing legislation proposed. I do not know the details or states of those. I don't generally recommend it, but it depends on exactly what you're doing, right? whether it might trigger the elements of like a criminal statute or something like that.
Okay, so could be risky. A question here about what public bodies mean. So I think this was going back to this question came up when we were talking about the Sanctuary Promise Act and questions of the sanctuary law and involvement of public resources in enforcing immigration law. I believe that's what this was related to. And this is asking about city and county departments. This person was confused because they'd heard about task forces that deputize city law enforcement to coordinate with the federal government. So can you speak a bit more about when we've got public resources and individuals working for the public restricted from participating in immigration enforcement, is that applying at the city level? Is that the county level? Is it only the state level? How is that working?
All of those city, county, state agencies are included in the definition of public body. And I'm looking, I don't think I have the statute number in front of me, but public body is defined in statute in the context of the Sanctuary Promise Law. So you can find a statutory definition of it. But yeah, it also includes like city and county election offices or something like that.
Okay. Does Oregon law require you to identify yourself if law enforcement asks for your name?
No, some states have a stop and ID law. Oregon does not. It's different if you're driving, right? There are certain rules, like if you're going to have the privilege of driving, then you're stopped, you need to show your license and registration, etc. But generally speaking, no, you don't have to identify yourself.
Okay. We just got 5 more questions to go. So I will say, if you do have any more questions, then put those in the Q&A now, because we're coming to an end. One question here: is there a good number for citizens to memorize to call if they are arrested, and what counts as a local phone call? I'm assuming this is in reference to being in a holding cell and being told you get your one phone call. Is there anyone, if you don't have, say, family to call, is there anyone it would make sense to call in that scenario?
I mean, I guess if you could call PERC, you could trigger like an attorney to come down. But I do think if you are concerned about being targeted by ICE yourself, find a person, memorize. This is kind of just real practical stuff, like memorize your person's phone number, so you don't have to rely on your phone to get it. Make sure that whoever your emergency contact is has access to copies of any important documents, maybe access to funds or money for bond, if that's going to be an option for you later on. So, yeah.
And as you mentioned earlier, Erin, there's those resources on the Oregon for All website that take you through safety planning for you or for your family. That is a really good thing to do for anyone who feels that they may be vulnerable to getting caught up in immigration enforcement. So that is, and of course that something has to be done in advance. So today is the best day to do that, as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Few more questions here. Just one, kind of out of curiosity, you mentioned you hadn't seen any situations where ICE had actually obtained a judicial warrant in order to enter or search. Why is it such an unusual thing for them to not actually try to get those warrants? Why wouldn't they go to a judge and try to get a full warrant so that they don't have to worry about being turned away?
I mean, it's a lot more work for them to do that, and historically, like even when they violate your rights and they like maybe conduct an unlawful search, there hasn't always been a great remedy. So if the law enforcement searches you in violation of the Fourth Amendment, you can, and there's a crime involved, you can file a motion to suppress that evidence, anything they get from it, and you can file it in court, and then they can't use that. That's the exclusionary rule. The exclusionary rule is very, very limited in immigration proceedings and even by circuit. I think the honest truth is they've never really needed to, and it's a lot more work for them to do that. So why would they?
That's a couple of questions actually related to children and students. So one question from someone who's a public school teacher at a school with a large number of immigrant families, interested first of all in getting a training for staff there on how to deal with the possibility of ICE enforcement. Maybe that's something you would be able to speak about. And then also, do you have any ideas about school specific resources? Is there anything out there speaking to people working in schools to try to get ready? And do we, I mean, I have to say, I could probably answer the last part of it for myself. What do we expect from ICE around schools in the coming months? It's kind of like asking me what next week's lottery numbers are. If we knew the answer to that, we would be
Yeah.
with it, I'm afraid. But yeah, let's talk about schools, resources for teachers, other school staff, what's out there for people.
So again, on the Oregon for All website, I think there are specific location type specific resources. I think there's one for schools. I also think there's one for healthcare facilities where there's kind of more specific guidance for those areas. If you're interested in getting a training or for us to come and do a presentation that's more tailored to your organization or school or business, you can reach out for us to do another one of these kind of trainings, but tailor some of the information. You know, I don't know whether we'll see ICE in schools. It's a terrifying prospect. Schools are also places where you don't just let anyone in, right? When I go to my kids' school, like I have to get buzzed in. They have to see who I am. So you don't have to let anyone in, just anyone into your school as well. So I think that training front desk, whoever is going to be that first line of contact, is really important, especially in those kind of sensitive locations.
And I'll put a link in a chat in the moment. Erin is doing, and Kenneth is doing trainings that are very, you can get a specific tailored training from us. I mean, this obviously we've tried today to make this very broad, make this applicable to everyone, but Erin has been going out and doing trainings that are in very particular situations, such as she mentioned, the healthcare settings. So there's certainly the possibility that we could help with doing a tailored training, come into the workplace and do a training that was specific to a particular kind of workplace setting or a particular kind of business. Three more questions here. So another question regarding children. If you are a caregiver of a family member who's a child or even an adult child that might have an intellectual or a physical disability, what is the scenario with children or with even adults who are people with intellectual or physical disabilities when it comes to these ICE situations? Are there any additional protections for them? Is there anything that other adults present can do? Can you speak about children and ICE? We've mostly focused on adults here.
Is the question concerned about the children being detained or about the caregivers being detained?
Unclear. So I guess we can take it from both perspectives.
So for caregivers, you can determine for yourself what you feel comfortable sharing, like if you're detained by ICE, but typically if you are a caregiver and you got a kid waiting for you, you got a baby inside the house, right? You say something and ICE will typically give you time to make arrangements for somebody to care for that child, or they'll call in the state, I guess, if they needed to. You're worried about a whole other set of rules apply to the detention of minors. And so they're just, again, because they're a vulnerable population and more strict rules apply, I don't see that as being like, those aren't the people who are easy to get into court quickly, right? And I think that's who ICE is really going after. So we can't say that they're not going to target children, but it's under the current law, it's hard to see how they would be able to do that lawfully in the way that they are conducting other adult arrests. If it is someone who is an adult but dependent and maybe has some mental incapacitation, there are some other rules that apply to those folks as well. For example, typically in removal or deportation proceedings, you don't get a government appointed attorney, even if you can't afford one. There is a slim exception for certain people with serious mental health disorders. So there are some kind of different rules and slightly stronger protections for some of these vulnerable groups.
Okay. Last two questions. If we know somebody has been arrested by ICE, how would you go about finding out where that person has been held? If that's a friend or a family member, you want to track them down, what do you actually do to find the person?
That's a great question. It's a great question also because I can easily answer it. So if you can get that person's A number, it's an 8 or 9 digit number. They might already have one if they've had negative contact with law enforcement before, or they've gotten some kind of immigration document like a green card before. They're going to have a USCIS number, A number. Again, it's a 9 digit number. Sometimes it's 8, but you just throw a 0 in the front of it. And there's a website, an ICE detainee locator. You can pop in someone's A number, and then it should tell you where they are being detained. If they've been arrested, but they didn't have an A number before the arrest, or you don't know what their A number is, you can try to contact them in where you think they might be. So most people who are detained in Oregon are processed briefly at one of our ICE offices in Oregon, but there are no overnight facilities. So they are typically taken to Tacoma, the detention center in Tacoma. You can call people there, you can schedule phone calls, or you can communicate with people in Tacoma. And if you're looking for details on that, the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, or NIRP, has really great guides in English and Spanish, guides to the detention center, the Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma, with information on how to communicate, how to schedule visits, etc. If you're able to get on a phone call, or maybe they can call you, they can give you their A number. Typically, they're going to be given a wristband, and their A number is going to be on their wristband. So you can ask them for that. And then you can be able to hopefully keep track of them thereafter. ICE can move people from detention centers. They can move people to really any detention center in the US. But if you have the A number and the database is being updated, which it has been mostly from my experience, you should be able to find them.
Okay, and a final question, pretty simple one. Are you able to make your slides available to everyone who attended today as a resource?
I'm going to defer to my communications director.
I'm fine with you doing it. We can make sure those get sent out to you. And also, just a reminder, ojsc.info/KYR. We have resources on there as well. And any public trainings that we're doing, we're putting those up there. A lot of the ones we're doing, as we mentioned, we're going into workplaces and we're doing tailored trainings for those workplaces. We're also doing a few that are actually more public events that anyone can attend. So if you found this helpful, if you think you would like to, share this with other people, have other people attend, so take a look at that, and you can get those details there, and we will keep adding more as and when we have new events. So thank you very much, all of you. Erin, is there anything else you want to add at this point as we're wrapping up?
No, just thank you to everyone who attended and is, out there defending our rights and protecting communities. So thank you to all of you.
That's great. And I do want to encourage you, if you want to get one of those tailored trainings, get in touch. We have a lot of them scheduled, so it may be a little while before we can get to you, but we are doing our best to do as many as possible. Thank you very much, everyone. We really appreciate your time and seeing so many of you here. And as I mentioned, we will make this available soon on our YouTube channel, Oregon Justice Resource Center YouTube, and then you can also send that out to people if there were people who couldn't make it today. But for now, enjoy your afternoon and stay safe.